Have you ever wondered how someone survives when everything around them collapses at the same time? I'm not talking about an accident or a natural disaster, but that sense of danger you feel when you realize that betrayal is coming from the one you trusted most. It's strange to think that, on an ordinary night, sitting at the table of my family's favorite restaurant, I could feel my life slipping from my hands without any warning. I remember flashes of that night, the sidelong glances, the cutting words, the awkward silence, my husband's name being said by the person I should most call my sister. In that moment, I understood what it's like to be pushed into a place where you no longer know who you can trust. What happened next is something almost no one could have imagined. But before I tell you what happened in that moment, let me go back a little. My name is Elena Bennett. I was born on May 24, 1994, in Albany, New York, and from an early age I grew up in apartment 2B on Washington Avenue, with my mother Regina, a teacher at Albany Elementary, my father Alberto, who sold construction materials at Lakeview Home Supplies, and my sister Sabrina, who was only 11 months younger than me. If there is one thing that has always been clear in my life, it is that I came later. Second daughter, second choice, second voice in any family decision. I grew up hearing that I needed to understand Sabrina's side, because she was younger, even though the age difference was barely a year. My childhood memories always seemed to involve Sabrina, most often taking something that was mine. One of the first images that comes to mind is me sitting on the living room carpet, trying to finish a 500-piece jigsaw puzzle, and Sabrina taking a piece without asking, only to smile for a photo when the puzzle was finished. At 6 years old, I already knew that if she wanted my toy, sooner or later it would end up in her things. I remember asking my father for a red Raleigh for Christmas and managing to convince him after months. I rode that bike for a week. After Sabrina fell off hers and scraped her knee, my mother showed up with a paintbrush and white paint. The next week, the red bike had turned white, with a new basket on the front, and Sabrina rode it around the block as if it had always been hers. All I was left with was her old one, with its flat tire and bent handlebars. And again the excuse, she has to learn, Elena. She'll share it with her sister. If there was one thing that was always present at home, it was comparisons. Sabrina's birthday party was a big party at the downtown YMCA, with balloons, tall cakes, gifts from the list. Mine was always at home, a cake bought at Stop and Shop, neighbors sitting on the couch, Sabrina blowing out the candle before me. At school, things didn't change much. I studied at Albany Elementary, room 105, and they called me Sabrina's sister. The classic would soon follow. Why don't you do what your little sister does? She participates, she's polite, she helps everyone. It seemed like everyone wanted me to be the same, except me. I just wanted to be noticed for what I did, not for my last name, or for what my sister did better. My father tried to balance things out, taking me out for ice cream while he bought chocolate for Sabrina, or inviting us to walk in Washington Park on Sundays. But all it took was one problem for her to make the house revolve around Sabrina again. Even in the little things, the new pencil case for school, the best slice of pizza, the computer password, I always had to give in. My mother said I needed to be patient after all. Real sisters share everything. But over time, I learned that sharing at home always meant giving up. But that was just the beginning of the nightmare. Now tell me, how long would you put up with always being the second option? Write in the comments what you would do if you were in my shoes. Would you share everything again, or would you reach your limit? When I was 10, I tried out for the school theater group. It was my chance to do something different, to stand out without having to depend on Sabrina. I spent days memorizing lines, trying hard to learn every detail of the Peter Pan script, until the list of approved candidates came out. I got the role of Wendy, and for a brief moment, I thought that I would finally have something of my own. It lasted exactly 4 days. Sabrina walked through the classroom door with a piece of paper in her hands and the smile I already knew. The teacher had invited her to be Tinkerbell. Her justification was that it would be cooler if the sisters participated together. During rehearsals, my mother applauded Sabrina's every move. I heard whispers saying that she was born for the stage. I wondered if I would ever be able to achieve anything without Sabrina around, but I got used to hiding it, pretending that I didn't care. That was how I grew up, always trying not to bother anyone, always hoping that the next step would be different. When I entered SUNY Albany in the fall of 2012, I thought I would finally have my own space. The college was a little over 20 minutes from home. I took the 27 bus almost every day, listening to podcasts and reading to distract myself. The campus was big, noisy, full of weirdos, with picnic tables scattered across the main lawn. I wanted to feel like I was starting over, but it's never that simple. My name was still Sabrina's sister to some of my high school classmates, but at least here I could walk without her following me. I was 18, living in Porter Hall, room 402, and sharing the space with Chloe, a girl who was obsessed with 80s horror movies. It was there, in the campus cafeteria, on a Wednesday night, that I met Ryan. He was a computer science major, standing in the pasta line, holding a textbook on networking and wearing a navy blue varsity basketball jersey. He joked about the food, commented on how cold it was that week in November, and started chatting as if he already knew me. At first, I thought it was strange, but it was nice to talk to someone who really looked at me, without seeming like he was comparing me to someone else. Our meetings became routine. Coffee at the daily grind, quick walks through Washington Park in the late afternoon, studying together in the library until close to midnight. Ryan didn't talk much about himself, but he listened attentively. When I told him about my plans, my fears, the stories no one else ever wanted to hear, he would stare at me as if it mattered. For the first time, I felt seen, without having to share anything with anyone. After 6 months, I automatically looked for him in the halls of college. When he asked me to the spring formal in 2013, I thought I was dreaming. We danced together, took pictures in the booth at the entrance, and then went out for milkshakes at Danny's Diner. I had never felt anything like it. The following summer, he invited me to meet his family in Syracuse. I remember the drive down Interstate 81, the sound of the radio, the feeling that I was going somewhere that was my own. Ryan's mother was a math teacher, his father a maintenance technician. They lived in a simple house with a yard full of trees and a porch painted green. I was treated like an important guest, offered lasagna, asked about my studies, and showed me old photos of Ryan from his graduation album. That's when I realized what I wanted for myself, a life with space to be who I was. After 3 years of dating, in 2015, Ryan proposed to me at the top of Colvin Avenue, watching the city light up at night. He blushed and could barely look at me. I accepted without hesitation, with sweaty hands and a hot face, feeling that it was finally my moment. We started planning the ceremony for June 23, 2016, at St. Mary's Chapel, near the lake. We made the guest list, chose the music, the flowers, everything just as I had dreamed. But in the middle of this dream, Sabrina showed up with her usual energy. At my bridal shower, she showed up wearing a long, sparkly white dress and paraded around the house as if it were her event. In her toast speech, she made a point of talking about herself, telling me about her achievements, her travels, and unforgettable moments with her sister. My mother thought it was funny and said it was just Sabrina's personality, but I felt my stomach tighten. At every detail of the wedding, she was there, suggesting changes, calling attention to herself, taking up space. I tried to ignore her, after all. It was my wedding, Ryan was by my side, and I couldn't let anything ruin it. I took a deep breath, pretended I didn't care, told myself that soon everything would be different, that my life with Ryan was finally just mine. Inside, I tried to believe that, this time, no one would take my place. I should have paid more attention to the signs. But what happened next? No one could have ever predicted. Stories like this bring us together because they remind us of what really matters. Having the courage to take up your own space even when it seems impossible. Leave your like now, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me, because the worst was yet to come. After the wedding, our routine seemed normal to outsiders. We lived in a small apartment on the second floor of 38 Central Avenue near Lincoln Park. The first few months were easy, the kind where even sharing a sink full of dishes seemed part of the deal. But slowly, the atmosphere in the house began to change. I started to notice small things, the kind that we pretend not to see so as not to cause trouble. Ryan's cell phone, which used to be left lying on the kitchen counter, was now always in his pocket or charging in airplane mode. He started to sleep later, saying that he had meetings with the team at Albany Tech, where he had been working since the beginning of last year. For those who don't know, software development teams usually work under tight deadlines. They call this a sprint, a phase in which everyone rushes to deliver a part of the project before the deadline. At first, it made sense to me. Ryan had always been a detail-oriented person, and the stress of delivering a system was real. But even so, the frequency of excuses started to bother me. His clothes started to smell different, kind of sweet, kind of floral, and it wasn't the perfume he'd always worn. I could notice it especially on the shirts that were in the laundry room, mixed in with mine. I tried to joke about the smell, hoping for a spontaneous response, but he just laughed and said that they must have changed the fabric softener at the building's laundry room. But I bought the detergent myself, and that smell wasn't ours. Some days, when he came home, his hair seemed lighter, especially at the ends. It wasn't just my imagination, since even his friends at work had commented. One Friday night after work, we went to Clancy's pub to meet some co-workers, and Julia, who works with me in the marketing department, asked if Ryan was trying to change his look. He immediately said no, that it was just the summer sun. But I knew that Albany had only had 4 days of intense sun since May, and we hadn't even gone out anywhere. I started paying attention to the details, the little lies that seemed too innocent. One time, I caught him smiling at his phone, and when I asked who it was, he said it was a meme in the team group. Another night, he stayed at the office until 2 a.m., saying he had to finish a report. But when I checked his banking app, I saw a transaction for $28 at Applebee's at 11:52. The receipt sat in the glove compartment for a week before I asked. He said he had to grab a quick dinner because the office coffee had gone bad, and he wanted to grab a bite to eat before going back to work. It was too much excuse for too little. I started to feel my body react. Sometimes, I would be at work and, out of nowhere, my hands would start to sweat. There were times when my chest would tighten, and I couldn't even explain why. It was an uncomfortable feeling, as if at any moment I would stumble upon some hidden truth. His messages became shorter and shorter, always curt, like, "I'll be late. Don't wait for me. I have a meeting. I'll be right back." I asked if something was wrong, and he said it was just the pressure of the projects, that everything would be fine as soon as he delivered the next version of the software to Albany Tech. I even started to notice the clothes he washed separately. 2 t-shirts smelling of strong perfume appeared in our laundry bag. I insisted again, and he said it must be the new disinfectant in the locker room at work. But he never brought any disinfectant home. I kept these little stories, cataloging every detail, until the day I went into the laundry room and found a strand of blonde hair stuck to the collar of his shirt. My head spun at that moment. It wasn't the first time I'd come across something strange, but seeing that strand of hair, almost white, in the middle of my clothes, stopped me. I felt my stomach turn, and I leaned on the washing machine to keep from falling. I remembered Sabrina, the games, the sweet scent she'd worn since she was a teenager, and for a second I tried to convince myself that I was exaggerating. I went to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the ceiling, unable to think straight. I didn't want to believe it. It couldn't be true. Ryan arrived that night around 10 more p.m., tired, saying he'd had a hard day. When I asked about his blonde hair, he smiled and said it must have belonged to someone in the office, that people joked around, wore wigs to make fun of themselves at happy hour. But his smile wasn't the same as before, and that explanation kept hammering away in my head. The following weeks were even worse. I started to feel weak in the knees every time he took longer than usual to answer. One day, my cell phone rang in the middle of the night. A message from him saying he was going to sleep at the office because he had missed the last bus. When I called to ask, he hung up before the second ring. I started to notice small absences, small changes in his behavior. Even his tone of voice changed, colder, less interested. I tried to talk to him. I suggested that he take a few days off, that we travel on Labor Day, but he refused. He said he couldn't, that the project was nearing its final stage, that they depended on him to deliver. It was easy to pretend that it was all work stress, that things would soon go back to normal, that it was just a bad phase. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. Every night before going to sleep, I would ask myself if it was just insecurity, if I was seeing problems where there weren't any. Even so, I started losing sleep, waking up in the middle of the night, pacing around the house, looking out the window, waiting to hear the key in the door. I wanted to believe that Ryan was the same as before. I wanted to trust that everything was okay. But the fear of being wrong, of finding out something I didn't want to know, grew so much that, suddenly, nothing inside my own home seemed safe anymore. I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. October 8th, 2025, Albany. 20 degrees outside and a gray sky. Typical of early autumn. It was my birthday, and even after everything I had been through in the last few weeks, I tried to convince myself that this family dinner could be an outlier. One of those moments that we save in our memories to try to hold on to when everything goes wrong. My mother called early, telling me not to be late, that she had already made a reservation at Verona, my favorite restaurant since college. Verona wasn't big, but it always had the smell of fresh bread and homemade tomato sauce in the air, the red and white checkered tablecloths, and the waiters who knew the name of every customer ever. I arrived shortly before 7 o'clock, with the effort of someone trying to look their best. I chose a dark blue blouse and a black skirt and left my hair down so I wouldn't have to look at myself in the mirror too much. My mother and father were already sitting at the table side by side, looking at the menu without rushing. I greeted them both and tried to smile, but my face seemed stiff. The light was yellowish, half light, and there was a basket of bread in the center of the table that no one touched. I sat on the opposite side, ordering a glass of white wine to try to relax. The clock read 7:16 when my mother's cell phone vibrated with a message. "We're coming." It took another 15 minutes for the door to open and the two of them to come in together, Ryan and Sabrina, side by side, laughing quietly at something that didn't include me. She was wearing a light green dress, her hair tied up in a lopsided bun, and a strong perfume that had arrived before her. Ryan walked in behind her, not even looking my way at first, fiddling with his phone. They sat on either side of me, Sabrina on my right, Ryan on my left. They greeted everyone and asked how my day had been. I tried to sound casual, but my mouth went dry. I noticed that Sabrina's hand was red, as if she had been scrubbing at it all day. The waiter came over with the menu and asked if we wanted anything special, and my mother ordered bruschetta to start. The place was silent, just the sound of silverware and laughter from the table in the back. My father asked about work. My mother wanted to know about the new store manager. I made up a quick answer, just to get away from the subject. Time seemed to drag. Every time I looked to the side, I saw Ryan typing on his cell phone, Sabrina fiddling with her napkin, and I was trying not to think about the last few months, about what I had felt, the different smell of the clothes, the little lies. The waiter brought the wine, filled the glasses, and we toasted with that classic birthday phrase, too forced for those who know the truth. I tried to eat, but everything seemed tasteless. I focused on the sound of the ice in the glass, on the bottle of water that was sweating on the table. My leg was swinging under the chair, and I could barely hold the glass steady. When the main course finally arrived, the house lasagna, I realized that the atmosphere was too strange to ignore. Ryan and Sabrina exchanged quick glances, talking to each other in low voices, as if everything else was in another room. My father noticed and tried to start a conversation, but the tension was so visible that he gave up after a few tries. The clock said it was 8:08. I counted every minute so as not to lose control. My throat closed up, and I had to drink water slowly, hoping not to choke in front of everyone. Dinner continued at this pace for another half hour until my mother ordered dessert. The waiter suggested the usual tiramisu. Sabrina said she preferred chocolate mousse, and Ryan kept fiddling with his cell phone, only looking up when my mother asked him directly what he wanted. He just ordered coffee. The silence returned, heavy, and I looked at the glass of the window next door, seeing the reflection of the group gathered together, each with a different expression. I felt my hands sweating and tried to think of something else, anything that would make me forget that that moment, deep down, had been marked from the beginning. I had no idea that in just a few minutes, everything I thought I knew about my family, about my marriage, about myself, would be ripped away in one fell swoop. I thought I knew what fear was, until that day. As dessert began, my mother did her best to keep the conversation going, but no one was really there. The tiramisu dish was placed in the center of the table, and only the sound of the spoon hitting the porcelain broke the awkward silence. I could hear the movement of the kitchen in the back, the sound of the old telephone ringing behind the counter. I counted each bite to see if I could make it to the end of that night without losing my mind. Until Sabrina cleared her throat, pushed her chair back slightly, and raised her wine glass, tapping the tip of her ring on the rim twice. Everyone looked at her at the same time. She smiled in that way that only she could. That smile that seemed to apologize for nothing and, at the same time, put herself at the center of everything. "I need to tell you something," she said, looking straight at my mom, then my dad, then me. My hand stopped in midair. The waiter walked behind me with a pizza order and bumped into my chair, but no one noticed. "I'm pregnant, and the father is Ryan. I never thought it would happen like this. But it happened because it's true love." Time stopped moving for a few seconds. All that was left was the echo of her voice, mixed with the clatter of the dishes, and the sound of my shallow breathing, unable to draw in air properly. I looked at my mother's face, who put her hand over her mouth, unable to say anything. My father stood still, staring at Sabrina as if he didn't understand the words she had just said. I didn't know whether to look at her, look at Ryan, or ask someone to tell me that it was a joke. But no one laughed. No one made jokes. Ryan's face was pale. He kept looking at his napkin, avoiding my gaze at all costs, as if that would protect me from something. In my head, a constant buzzing tried to drown out the scene, but it was no use. Sabrina's sweet perfume seemed to spread throughout the table, suffocating any reaction. No one said anything. The restaurant was still open, waiters walking around, music playing on the radio in the background, but it was as if the table was in another world. My mother started to shake and dropped her napkin on the floor. When she tried to speak, all that came out was a whisper. "It can't be. It can't be." My father squeezed her hand under the table, not knowing where to look. Sabrina held her glass tightly, staring at each person, as if she wanted to see their reaction engraved in her memory. Ryan tried to look up at me, but he couldn't. I could feel my face getting hot, my whole body feeling stuck, as if someone had ripped the floor out from under the chair. Everything I had held in for years, all the little wounds, all the days of pretending it didn't hurt to share what little I had with Sabrina, exploded there, without warning. It wasn't just the wedding, or the betrayal, or the baby. It was everything that came before, every time my desires were put off, every childhood memory that had her name stamped on top of mine. The silence was deafening. I waited for someone to speak up, for my mother to stand up, for my father to tell them to stop, but nothing happened. No one stood up for anyone. I thought about screaming. I thought about leaving, but I couldn't even breathe properly. The clock in the living room showed 11 minutes past 21. The life I thought I had ended there, in front of everyone, with the sound of a glass being placed back on the table. I realized at that moment that there was no point in trying to be discreet anymore. No one was there to defend me. And the worst part was that not even time seemed willing to pass. It was the kind of scene that no one imagines seeing, but that, when it happens, leaves a lasting impression on you. But that was just the beginning of the nightmare. Just as Sabrina's words were still echoing in the restaurant, the sound of silverware falling on the table next to me brought me back to the present. My face was throbbing. My body was still as stone, but something inside me finally reacted. I could let it all go. I could pretend one more time, but I had already reached my limit. I remained silent just long enough to feel everyone watching me, waiting for me to fall. That was when I decided that I would no longer be the forgotten daughter, nor the submissive wife. I looked straight into Ryan's eyes first. He tried to hold my gaze, but looked away. Then I looked at Sabrina, who was still holding her glass as if it were a shield. My hands were cold, but I firmed my voice. "Do you know what's worse than being betrayed? It's being made a fool of by someone who should be family. Do you think I don't understand?" My mother shook her head, gesturing for calm, but I continued. I grabbed my purse from under my chair and placed a brown envelope full of papers on the table. I opened it slowly, without the rush of someone who needs to prove to herself that she won't swallow any more toads. "I already knew," I said. "I knew exactly 96 days ago. Not because someone told me, but because I learned not to trust just pretty words. I hired a private detective, Mr. Harrison. He works on Lark Street, near the station. I received reports, photos, screenshots of messages from him. I read every email exchanged, every excuse, every time you two arranged to meet behind my back. My mother's eyes widened. My father's mouth dropped open. Ryan dropped his napkin onto his lap and fiddled with his wedding ring, unable to hide his discomfort. I went further. I took the most important piece of paper out of the envelope. "Do you know what this is?" I said, turning the document toward them. "This is proof that you not only lied, but you did it on purpose. Here is the report from Ryan's urologist, Dr. Patel. He had a vasectomy 2 years ago, on September 25th, 2023 at Albany Medical Center. This means, for those who didn't understand, that there is no chance whatsoever that he is the father of your baby, Sabrina." The silence that followed was otherworldly. Even the waiter realized something had happened, and he stopped by our table for a second, but no one moved. Sabrina dropped her glass so quickly that she almost spilled wine on the tablecloth. Her face went red, then white, then lost. She looked at Ryan, hoping for some miracle, but he just stared down, completely defeated. My mother ran her hand through her hair, trying to gather her thoughts, and my father pulled the envelope toward him, reading every line as if trying to figure out where everything had gone wrong. I continued, "You can make up whatever you want, but the facts are there. I spent sleepless nights, suspecting everything, keeping every detail to myself. I thought I would never have the courage, but the time has come for you to face what you did. This is not about a mistake. It is about destroying a family, lying, manipulating, making someone believe they were less than they deserved." The table seemed frozen. The clock on the wall read 21 hours and 27 minutes. On the other side of the room, someone was asking for the bill, but no one was breathing. Sabrina turned her face away, unable to look at me. Ryan squeezed my hand, tried to say something, but all that came out was a whisper. I didn't wait any longer. I took the envelope back, organized the papers, and closed the bag. I said at once, looking at everyone, "Now, each one must deal with their own conscience. I will no longer carry weight that is not mine." I got up from my chair, my legs heavy, but my head held high. I felt the cold of the tile floor, the restaurant door opening and closing in the background, my mother's lost gaze, my father's blank expression, and Sabrina's panicked face, which, for the first time, seemed to have no ready answer to give. There was no more doubt, no room for explanation. There, in front of everyone, it was clear who was standing and who needed to hide. But what happened next, no one could have ever predicted. The sound of the door slamming was still echoing when I saw Sabrina rush out of Verona, one hand covering her face, the other trying to hold the bag hanging from her shoulder. Her heel almost got caught on the carpet at the entrance, but no one moved to help. The entire restaurant seemed to notice the scene, but everyone pretended not to see. Ryan stood next to me, his expression blank. He raised his hand, as if to grab my arm, but I moved away. All he could do was mumble, in a low voice, "It wasn't planned. You have to believe." I didn't answer. There was no more room for explanation. I felt exhausted. My parents tried to pick up the pieces, talking at the same time, looking for some kind of excuse that would make everything less ugly. My mother asked if I wanted water. My father said that people make mistakes, that the important thing was to talk, but neither of them seemed to believe what they were saying. For the first time, I saw them both as normal adults, trying to hold on to a situation that was no longer under their control. I took my phone out of my purse and called Dr. Anna Jones, a lawyer specializing in family law. I didn't even wait until I got home. I briefly explained everything that had happened and asked her to start the divorce process immediately. She spoke calmly, explaining that the first step would be to freeze the joint accounts, to ensure that nothing would be taken without my consent. I gave her the information on the phone right there in the parking lot, typing in the bank password with a shaking hand. I told her about the evidence, screenshots of emails, photos, the medical report, the bank transfers that Ryan made to an extra card without telling me. She asked me to save everything on a flash drive, along with the call history and the messages exchanged over the last 3 months. In less than 20 minutes, I had a list of what I needed to do as soon as I got home. When I got back to the apartment on Central Avenue, Ryan was sitting on the couch, his coat thrown haphazardly on the armchair. the light from the lamp making the room even colder. He started talking again, apologizing, saying that everything had gotten out of control, that he still loved me, that I needed to understand that he was confused. I just listened in silence, didn't even try to argue back. I went up to the bedroom, grabbed 2 suitcases, and threw my clothes inside without folding them. I set aside the flash drive with the files, the bank documents, and the envelope with all the papers I had gathered since the suspicions began. In less than half an hour, I was at the door. Before leaving, I left the spare key on the kitchen counter and sent a quick text to my friend Chloe. "Can I sleep over tonight?" She responded right away and sent me the address of her building on Elm Street, number 122, 3rd floor, apartment 9. I took an Uber, sat in the back seat, rested my head against the window, and watched the city lights passing by. Each red traffic light, each distracted pedestrian, as if everything remained the same for everyone except me. At Chloe's apartment, she was waiting for me with a blanket and a tub of mint chocolate chip ice cream, my favorite since college. I didn't ask her anything, and neither did she. I just sat on the bed, took off my shoes, and lay there, feeling the tiredness wash over me in waves. I texted Dr. Anna to confirm that the documents had been sent, changed my phone's SIM card, and blocked Ryan on all social networks. The next morning, I called the company's HR department and explained that I needed 2 days to take care of personal matters. I spent the day sorting out bureaucracy, opening an account in my name only, changing my email password, and organizing all the receipts. Each task I crossed off my list was a small victory. I didn't know what was coming next, but for the first time in years, I felt like I had some control. I took a deep breath, opened Chloe's bedroom window, and let the cool morning air in. The sun was shining from the side, cars were speeding by below, and everything seemed so normal that I almost smiled. I never imagined that making such a difficult decision could give me such a sense of relief. I was no longer anyone's shadow. I didn't need to ask permission to take up space. At that moment, even without knowing how to rebuild everything, I understood that this was the beginning of my real life, but nothing could prepare me for the consequences that were yet to come. The divorce process was as exhausting as I had imagined. There was no more talking, just endless meetings between lawyers, documents, joint account spreadsheets, and a silence that seemed heavier than any discussion. At first, Ryan tried to argue, suggested that perhaps it would be better to try to talk privately, asked to review the terms, but I did not back down on anything. Dr. Anna Jones was firm in every detail of the prenuptial agreement we had signed in 2032, making it clear that what was mine would stay with me. My family's antique furniture, rare books, part of the savings, even the car my grandfather had given me before he passed away. In the end, the agreement was divided exactly as it should have been. Half the value of the house on Central Avenue went to me, along with all the assets I had before the marriage. When the paperwork was finally done on December 11th, 2025, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I returned the key to the old apartment to Ryan's lawyer, and in silence, I moved on. There was no party, no friends to celebrate, just a feeling of relief mixed with that emptiness of losing something that had been gone for a long time. The end-of-year parties were strange. A divided family, cross-examinations from the uncles and aunts, and a forced atmosphere in the photos. I avoided any direct contact with Ryan and Sabrina. I only knew about them through side conversations or dry messages exchanged in the family group. At the end of January, the news of Theo's birth arrived via text message. Sabrina went to St. Peter's Hospital, on the other side of the city, and told my parents at the last minute. I didn't go to visit. My mother sent me a photo of the baby wrapped in a blue blanket, with an exhausted smile on her face, trying to maintain the atmosphere of novelty, as if everything else could be erased by this birth. But a few weeks later, the buzz began. The baby had intense green eyes and dark brown hair, features that were nothing like Ryan or our family. The conversation started quietly, but soon no one could pretend they didn't see it anymore. My mother whispered to my aunt. My father searched for answers in the past, and even Sabrina began to seem more withdrawn. Then came the DNA test. It was a 7-day wait between the test and the results, days in which Sabrina's silence seemed to scream through the house. On Saturday morning, when she finally got the confirmation, my mother called me crying, unable to finish her sentence. The father is not Ryan. The father is Alex, that executive from the office where she worked last year. I couldn't feel anything, just a mix of surprise and resignation, as if all the suffering of the last few months had turned to dust. Alex was married, the father of 2 children, one of those soft-spoken men who greeted everyone at company events. Confusion set in. Alex didn't try to deny it, but he also didn't commit to admitting anything. His marriage almost ended, and his relationship with Sabrina turned into a series of fights, phone calls in the middle of the night, disappearances and return visits. The baby became, unintentionally, the center of a silent dispute. Sabrina entered therapy for the first time in her life, more at my parents' insistence than of her own free will. She stopped talking to me, disappeared from family gatherings, and started avoiding any situation where she might find me. The atmosphere within the family changed. My parents began to look back, trying to understand where they had gone wrong. My father asked, for the first time in 40 years, if he had ever made me feel less of a daughter. My mother admitted that she had been overly demanding, and said she had never realized how much that hurt me. For the first time, they tried to get closer, to listen without interrupting, to seek some kind of reparation for so many years of imbalance. It wasn't easy. There was no manual for rebuilding what had been broken for so long. But little by little, I began to accept dinner invitations, respond to messages, and open small gaps for dialogue. I didn't forgive anyone right away, but I finally began to feel that I existed, not as someone's shadow, but as someone who had her own space. Sabrina, for the first time in her life, seemed out of control, vulnerable, incapable of reinventing herself overnight. She kept quiet, immersed herself in therapy, and distanced herself from everything, including Alex. My father said she needed time. My mother insisted on visits. But deep down, each of them understood that some choices cannot be taken back. And it was in the midst of this family chaos, when the silence in the house was no longer so suffocating, that I realized that nothing would be the same again, except that I still had no idea what I was about to discover about myself. In March of 2026, I signed the contract for my new apartment at number 514 on North Pearl Street, 7th floor, overlooking the Hudson. It was a simple place, but every detail was my choice. I painted the walls the way I always wanted, hung old photos mixed with new ones, and put together a bookshelf with only the books that survived the move. I didn't need to ask anyone's opinion, nor share the Wi-Fi password, or decide where to store the bath towel with a partner. At first, everything seemed too big for just one person, but it took the first night listening to the silence to realize that this was what I needed. With each unpacked box, I felt a weight lifting, as if each new object placed in its place was a silent affirmation that, now, this life was mine alone. The job changed, too. In April, after 5 years as a marketing assistant at Parker & Williams, I got the promotion I'd been chasing for so long. I became digital campaigns manager, with a team of 4 and a new project to oversee right away. I got a new keycard, my own space in the glass-enclosed office, and for the first time, my name on the door. My boss praised my dedication, and even colleagues who'd barely noticed me started asking me for advice or sharing coffee with me in the conference room. I felt proud, without guilt or apology. With all the new things happening, Arthur started to get closer. He had always been a reserved colleague, the kind who listens more than he talks, who never tries to take up too much space. At first, it was just a matter of exchanging ideas about work or making jokes over lunch in the cafeteria. But after everything blew up in my life, he was the one who sent me a message asking if I was okay, who offered to help me move, who stayed after work to review a report so I wouldn't have to go home in the dark. Our friendship grew without pressure, in the right way. He didn't ask about the past, he respected my silences, and he celebrated each achievement without turning it into competition. When we started hanging out together, everything was light, without the burden of someone needing to prove something to someone. Our dates were simple: pizza on the porch, a walk in the park, old movies with popcorn popped in the pan. The first time he slept over at my apartment, he brought a bag of coffee and a note on paper. "There's no room for lies here." Over time, I realized that I could trust, that I didn't need to hide or doubt what I felt. Arthur wasn't trying to save me from anything. He was just there, whole, for real. It was the first time I found myself by someone's side without feeling like I had to give up everything, or give up who I was to fit into someone else's life. A few months later, on a Sunday afternoon, Sabrina called me out of the blue. Her voice was lower, without that tone of someone who always had a ready answer. She said she was trying to start over, that therapy was helping her understand her own chaos. She said that Theo would be 6 months old and asked if I would accept to be his godmother. For a few seconds, I hesitated, not because I wanted to punish her, but because I had learned that accepting is not the same as forgetting. I answered that I would accept, yes, but that I needed clear limits. I didn't want to take part in pretense or in parties that had an atmosphere of drama. I wanted to be there for Theo, without giving up my truth. Sabrina thanked me, and for the first time, I felt that she was really listening, not just talking. At the baptism, I wore a simple light blue dress and sat next to my parents, who were still learning how to be a family. I held Theo in my arms, looked at him, and thought about all the things that little boy had no idea about, but that somehow had also given me the chance to start over. Arthur stood close by, hugged me during the photo, and smiled in that calm way that reminded me every day that I no longer needed to ask permission to be happy. When I got home, I closed the door, took off my shoes, and looked around the room, illuminated by the late afternoon light. The smell of coffee still hung in the air, and this time, the peace didn't seem borrowed. It was mine, and no one could take it away. But the greatest lesson was yet to come. On the 8th of October, 2024, the weather in Albany was already changing again. Red leaves falling on the sidewalks, the air starting to cool. My birthday arrived without the anxious anticipation of other times. This time, there was no fancy restaurant, nor the obligation to gather the family around a tense table. I decided to do something simple. I invited the people who really stuck by my side, the friends who called on my worst days, Chloe with her direct way, the people from work, Arthur, of course, and even some neighbors who I learned to admire in the small gestures of everyday life. I prepared dinner at home, strung lights on the porch, and arranged the chairs so that no one was left alone. There was no atmosphere of ceremony, no script to follow, just real conversations, sincere laughter, and a cake bought at the bakery on the corner. As I poured the wine, I looked around and felt a calm I had never known. Everyone there knew what I had been through, but no one saw me as a victim. They saw my choices, my courage, my scars, and also my new desires. I spent the night listening to stories, remembering moments, dancing in the living room with Chloe, and at one point, I sat on the couch and let my gaze wander out the open window, watching the city lights reflected in the glass. There was no sign of Sabrina or Ryan, and no room for any old burdens. Even my parents, who were now learning to be Theo's grandparents, arrived early, brought flowers, and didn't stay long, respecting my space and the new dynamic we had built. More mature, less invasive. It was there, sitting with a glass of wine in my hand and my feet bare, that I realized how much everything had changed. Not just the house, nor my circle of friends, but mainly my sense of belonging. For the first time, I didn't feel left out of anything. I no longer needed to seek approval from those who never really cared to see me. I no longer worried about appearing strong or right all the time. I learned to enjoy the silence, the routine, the quiet mornings reading by the window, the improvised dinners with Arthur, the shared coffees, and the lazy Sundays. I learned to say yes without fear and no without guilt. When everyone left, I spent some time alone in the living room, listening to the distant noise of cars on the street, Arthur's calm breathing coming from his room, the ticking of the clock on the bookshelf. I felt that, for the first time in years, my story no longer depended on someone else's choices. I was in charge of my steps, my losses, and most importantly, my achievements. What was left of that hurricane was the space I needed to discover who I really was, to learn to respect myself, to understand that everything I lost made room for what I would never have had the courage to ask for before. Being Theo's godmother, taking care of my space, working on what I believe in, building a new relationship without rushing. Each achievement now had the right weight, the right size. When I closed the door that night, I realized that I no longer needed to fear any new beginnings. It wasn't about overcoming Sabrina, Ryan, or anyone else. It was about being Elena completely, without asking for permission, without fear of making mistakes, without needing an audience. Losing what I thought I wanted was what made room for everything I really needed, and no one can take that away from me anymore. The silence of that night still echoes inside me. There is no longer a shadow of the past, nor a trace of everything that held me back. The story you just heard is not about losing or winning. It is about facing the truth, breaking invisible chains and building from scratch, a space that is only yours. You felt every change, every renunciation, every painful step. Now, I want to see how far you will go. Tell me in the comments. Would you have the courage to give up everything to finally live your life your way? Right here, I choose my truth. Don't let it go, because this statement is your commitment to yourself. I know this story touched you. What happened here reveals what is most human, the strength that emerges from the limit, the fear that becomes impulse, the pain that turns into freedom. Stories like this don't just appear. They exist so that no one forgets how strong they can be. You are already part of this story just by getting here. Now, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. It's not just another click. It's your way of saying that you value each true story, that you recognize the courage of those who don't accept less than they deserve. Here, each video challenges what you think about survival, loss, starting over, and personal power. Your presence makes a difference. Your reaction feeds this community of people who don't want to be in the audience, but want to truly live their own story. Don't think it's over. The next video is already on the screen, and there's no time to rest. What you've experienced here was intense, but what's coming next will turn you inside out. Challenge everything you believe is possible, and show that the impossible only exists until someone proves otherwise. Click now, come with me, and be ready for what no one imagines facing.